Check, check.
Check, check. I do promise the bar will be open after Ben's talk, so you're welcome to sit back down.
Great.
Check, check.
Yeah. Check, check. Turn it up. 22. Sorry. Okay.
Walk much? Not much. Good. Good, all right, not bad. Good, good, this is important.
I think it helps that everyone is getting lubricated.
Scary thing. Yeah, seriously. It does bump you. Okay, hi, everybody, and welcome. I think most everyone knows that my name is Doug Anderson. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Health Policy and Management at the Milken Institute School of Health at the George Washington University. It's hard to do in one breath, but we practice. I guess I'm standing between you and the speaker's standing between you and refill, so I'll try to be brief. One thing I wanted to do, however, was note, because we missed him a little earlier today, I want to take a second to recognize Emeritus Professor Dr. Kurt Darr is here, really important part of our program and part of our history and legacy. And we need to sort of bear in mind the things that he says, their life lessons. And quite honestly, when I was thinking about what I wanted to say about Ben Tingey, our young alum presenter of the afternoon, I was actually recalling something that Dr. Darr had said upon the occasion of his retirement from our program. And we dragged him into one of these Gibbs oration, and he is a very private and withdrawn person that doesn't, unlike me, he doesn't like to stand up and yap, but we forced him to make some comments. And he said at the time that it's a misconception to think that as students go through our program that we are shaping leaders of the future and developing these fabulous healthcare leaders. He said, no, they come fairly well formed, and all we do is just knock off a few of the rough edges here and there and let those gems shine through. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. We'd love to take more credit than we deserve for your futures. They're yours and you own them. And I think the important thing about this afternoon's presentation is to understand what that future can look like and what can be created as you are becoming these incredible gemstones moving forward in the industry. This talk is always interesting to the alums who have known Ben professionally in their careers, or perhaps they were with school with him. But honestly, the real audience this afternoon are our current students to understand what does this future potentially look like for me as I'm trying to figure out what's my next step, what's my direction, and how do I move forward. And I can't think of a better example of that than our awardee of the Young Alum of the Year, Ben Tingey, and I'll explain why. Ben came fairly well formed. I'm going to give him a great deal of credit. He came to us from Brigham Young University. Why he'd make that trek eastward again that's his problem. Glad he did. Came to us with a cum laude degree and had spent missionary time learning to be fluent in Spanish, working with immigrant communities. So he brought some game with him, and I thought, well, that's good. But it wasn't just that. It's the way he applied himself within the framework of our program. He was the 2011-2012, then known as HSML, Student Association President. He was the Eric Sellers Scholar. He was the member of the Dean's Advisory Council. He took opportunities and recognized them and moved forward. During his time with us, he worked as an intern at Privia Health. He accepted an administrative fellowship with what was then called the Carolinas Healthcare System. Upon completion of that fellowship, stayed on in increasing management roles. The organization has since changed. It's now known as Atrium Health this week. With its business, it might be Wake Forest Atrium Health next week. I believe that's the understanding. And he has moved into their innovation space, where he is a manager, a member of their innovation team. And I think the thing that I take away from all of that is we think as faculty, as we work with you as students, we're providing this extraordinary base of knowledge, and we've got everything that we want to share and move you forward. But then when we step back, we look and we think our students, when they really move forward in this world, go so much further than we are. And they're doing so much more. And that's exactly what Ben's doing now. In his little bio, you can read about this. They work in Atrium Health's corporate intelligence and environment scanning. He and his team apply human-centered design. Well, we kind of figure out what that is. Disruptive innovation strategy. Okay, fill that in on your bingo buzzword card, because we're all into disruptive innovation. And then jobs to be done theory. You got me. Had no clue, had to look it up, never heard of jobs to be done theory. I hope I'll speak to that a little this afternoon. And other demand-side innovation tools. This is not the traditional path that we've thought so very much about what we're bringing our students. It is a disrupted future. It is a very different way of thinking about what we need to do to be effective in changing the health of this country. Innovation, and they're at the forefront of this innovation team. Now, I will say to you, on a personal note, I have visited Ben in his innovation lab in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm absolutely clueless what they do. It looks to me, no, I'm serious, it looks to me like they play with Tinker Toys all day. I just was like, yeah, we can make that a yellow curtain. It's like, well, okay, whatever. But I know that they do it, and I know what they're doing actually makes a difference in the experience of the patients of that healthcare system, and they're very much at the leading edge of that. And that's not due in no small part to Ben's contributions. And in addition to that, they like to share that knowledge. They have a podcast, which I guess that's a millennial thing. You got to have a podcast, A Sherpa's Guide to Innovation, and Ben Tingey is their host, and I think that's pretty neat. But I will say this, the thing that I also understand about Ben and have appreciated so very much for so very many years is his absolute dedication to the work-life balance and the importance of family, which is why I want to introduce the most important parts of this presentation, his wife Jacqueline and their son John, okay? As well as they brought their own Sherpa of babysitting, his father Craig. So welcome to the Tingeys. Ben, welcome to this presentation.
Thank you.
And that's all yours.
Thanks for coming. It's really very generous, and I kept having to pinch myself and think, was this my eulogy? Or but thank you so much, and thank you for all the professors here rubbing off the rub edges. I may still have a few to go, but this is a real honor. As I was thinking, while I was listening to Paul Levy and Dr. Nguyen, I was thinking, man, I pity whoever has to follow them. But I think my presentation will actually be a little bit of a variation on a theme of some of the things that we've already heard. So I remember when I was 12 years old, and my dad and I were in the bathroom. He was helping me tie my tie in front of the mirror, and I was about to give a talk at church, and he said, Ben, I'll give you some advice. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. And that's great advice, and you should follow it, even if I don't today. Not that I don't appreciate my dad's wisdom. I think he's the greatest man on the face of the planet, and I'm glad that he's here to support me. Before I proceed any further, I offer two preambles. And the first is, I may say some things that you disagree with. And mine are strong opinions held loosely, and I encourage you to challenge my thinking, because if we're all thinking alike, then we're not really thinking. My second preamble is, it may seem like I'm being critical at times. I in no way want to discount the heroic efforts of our physicians and nurses and clinical and operational professionals. It's just that using my lens of innovation, it's impossible for me not to see opportunities for improvement. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, some of those opportunities for improvement. But who am I? The poet William Wordsworth said that there are in our existence spots of time that with distinct preeminence retain a renovating virtue. And I want to share a few of those spots of time in my life that have shaped a little bit about who I am. So as Professor Anderson mentioned, I went to Brigham Young University for my undergrad, and I studied American studies was my major, mostly transcendentalist and religious literature, so people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and Henry David Thoreau, Louisa May Alcott, and other people with 3 names. And then after my freshman year, I served as a proselyting missionary for 2 years in the exotic state of South Carolina for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And as Dr. Anderson mentioned, my assignment was specifically for the Latino immigrant population there. And so I spent time learning their language, and I came to just love the people and their food. Now, as Dr. Bonar asked me to speak, he said, please be inspirational. And so here's my inspiration, that if you want a life full of joy and inspiration, then you need to find a spouse as wonderful as my Jackie. And so I'm grateful that she's here. I'm proof that it's possible to marry out of your league, okay? So that should be inspiration enough. And if you marry someone so wonderful, you can also have children as wonderful who inspire you every single day. And so these are my boys, and Johnny's in the back there. And they are everything to me. When I was an undergrad, I had the opportunity to work at the embassy in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, for the State Department. And I got a secret security clearance, and my colleagues tease me and say that I was probably a spy. And after BYU, I applied to the George Washington University and spent 2 wonderful years here in Foggy Bottom, though before this beautiful building was constructed. About a month after I started classes, I was thinking about what I wanted to do in the spare time that I had when I wasn't studying. And with my family, and I wanted to do some type of internship that was a little bit different. And I was like, well, I'm here in DC, what could I do? And so I applied for this internship for this little teeny tiny company called Privia Health. And I was maybe the 11th employee there. I ended up working there for 1.5 years during my 2 years. And just a few months after I left, they got a $400 million investment from Goldman Sachs. And I'll leave it up to you to determine if it was because of all the great work I did or because they finally got rid of me and started making some progress. But it was there at Privia Health where the seeds of my interest in innovation were planted. I then did an administrative fellowship at Carolina's healthcare system in a department called the Management Company, which was an internal consulting team doing strategic planning, project management, business analytics, and innovation as well. And was there for about 3 more years after my fellowship, and I worked in corporate strategy. And then about 2.5 years ago, there was a role that opened up in the Atrium Health Innovation Engine, and I jumped at that opportunity. So Atrium Health is a relatively, well, I guess our name is new within the last couple of years, and our mission is to improve health, elevate hope, and advance healing for all. And we take the for all very seriously. The Innovation Engine's mission is to accelerate the transformation of Atrium Health. And just a few facts about Atrium Health. It's probably the largest healthcare system you've never heard of. It's the 2nd largest public not-for-profit after the VA, and it's actually a public health system. Its tax name is the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Housing Authority, and so it began as a housing authority out of the city of Charlotte. A little more than $11 billion in revenue, 70,000 teammates. In 2018, more than $2 billion of uncompensated care and other community benefits. The Innovation Engine is a team of about 10 people, and we like to quote Shakespeare and say that though we be but little, we are fierce. And we accelerate transformation through 4 key domains. And the first is human-centered design, which I'll talk a bit more about, but we see that just as much a mindset as a set of tools. We also are we're the front gate before you come in the front door of the healthcare system. And so with a lot of strategic partnerships with startup companies, with big companies like 3M or GE or others, we're often the ones having those initial conversations before it officially happens elsewhere in the organization. We also spend a lot of time on business model innovation, and I'll share more about that in my presentation, where we design and test new clinical and business models, and also commercialization. And so this is where we help our teammate inventors, typically physicians, but inventors of all stripes who have brilliant ideas for devices or therapeutics or whatever it might be, and we help them get intellectual property protection, patents, and then we license it and help potentially spin it out as a company and manufacture whatever product it is and sell it. All right, so what do I really do every day? So in my past life in corporate strategy, most of my time was at my desk in spreadsheets and PowerPoint, and never once did I leave my desk to actually talk to a patient. And I got kind of tired of that, and so my work in innovation has brought me much closer to the patients and doing what I really love to do, which is designing with them, developing empathy for their situation and trying to provide culturally competent care. And so one project that I've been able to work on, which has been very close to my heart, was we were asked to design an urgent care light for the Latino population. And the Latino population is 15% of the city of Charlotte, but they face significant access and cultural barriers. And so what I was able to do was use my Spanish fluency and go into their homes and interview them about their experiences receiving care. And we invited them to participate in our design session process, and they provided feedback along the way, and they were so involved that they wanted to name this clinic Nuestra Clínica, which means our clinic, because they felt so invested in this project. Just last month, I was able to facilitate a design session with the YMCA. So we have a close partnership with them, and one of their facilities was up for renovation. And it's an aging facility, but it's in a really vibrant arts district in Charlotte. And they wanted to do something different, and so the chief strategy officer approached me and said, help us reimagine what we might do with this space so that it better impacts the health of the community, and that we don't just do the same thing we always do, which is a gym and a pool and a parking deck. How can we make this really influential in the community and affect the social determinants of health? And so using design thinking, we facilitated this design session. It was actually at a brewery right across the street from the facility, and like 75% of the people that we invited to come either lived in that neighborhood and were members of the Y, or they worked in that neighborhood. And so the importance of designing with people, not just for people, I think is something to really emphasize in our work. Our first attempt at business model innovation was with a value-based primary care practice called Proactive Health. And we spun that out of our medical group in 2016. And it's a tech-enabled lifestyle medicine practice where a physician quarterbacks the care of a whole team of healthcare workers, dietitians, health coaches. And what I was involved in was the service and experience design aspects. And it had consistently the highest patient satisfaction ratings of any practice in the medical group. But in innovation, things don't always work out, right? And as Dr. Wen talked about just earlier, there's value in sharing some of our failures. And this practice has done well in some aspects, and that the patients that have been a part of it have absolutely loved it, but it hasn't grown the way that we hoped it would. And we're going to be shutting it down in January. And that's just what happens in innovation, is you learn, and then you move on to the next thing. Another fun project that I got to do. So in Charlotte, many women are choosing our competitor for maternity services, and there are reasons for that. And so we did interviews, again, in the community of women who had received their care at Atrium Health, women who had received care at our competitor, women who had received care at birthing centers who are neither affiliated with either of the health systems in the city. And we learned all about what they wanted out of their maternity experience, and it wasn't what we were providing them. And so our women's health leadership said, okay, well, help us figure out what we need to do. And there's so many things that we could do, but we wanted to help galvanize the leadership team around a shared vision for the future and to unite them around one common vision. And so what we ended up doing was we wrote a future narrative, and in nerd speak, that's called a comic book, about what maternity care at Atrium Health could look like in 5 years. And so we told this story of a family who received care at Atrium Health and made it visual, made it a narrative, and it was much more easy for the leaders to say, oh, okay, yeah, I see what that future could look like and the type of partnerships and resources we need to pull in order to make it happen. But perhaps the most fun thing I get to do is the podcast. I love hosting the podcast. And we bring in innovation thought leaders from all over, not just people on my team, but from all over the country. And some people we've had on recently, we had Steve Downs, who's the Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We had Tom Schlegel, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at Radio Flyer Wagons, you know, the red wagons. Todd Dunn, the Director of Innovation at Intermountain Healthcare. And so we bring these people on and we learn as much as we can, and it's so fun. But here's the thing, creating the podcast doesn't necessarily make me a great innovator, and listening to the podcast may not necessarily make you a great innovator, but this is what will make you a great innovator. If you take out your phones and subscribe to a Sherpa's Guide Innovation podcast and provide us a 5-star rating and a review, that makes you a great innovator. I'm waiting. Just kidding. Let's talk about the word innovation for a second. Its real meaning often gets lost in innovation theater. What it really means is how organizations transform resources, labor, capital into products and services of greater value, using a different approach or a different set of tools. Definitions are always more boring than what it actually is. But I'll let you in on a little secret. Innovation is actually a smokescreen for change management and risk management. It's risk management in that it's much better for an innovation team like ours to test something small, spending a little bit of money, only affecting a small part of the organization, so that we can learn quickly and see if it works before the organization spends a whole ton of money rolling it out and it's a massive failure. And so we fail small, we fail fast, we fail cheap in order to be that learning laboratory of the organization. But even still, it can be hard to pin down exactly what innovation is or isn't, and I find it's more helpful sometimes to talk about where innovation happens, and that gives more of a context, and context creates meaning. So there are 3 types of innovation. There's disruptive or market creating, there's sustaining, and there's efficiency innovations. And these definitions come from Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, and we use all their work. We have a lot of their team on our podcast, and a lot of their influences is in this presentation. All 3 types are important. The disruptive or market creating is you could think of it as introducing something entirely new that creates a new market that didn't exist before. Sustaining innovation is when you are taking those new markets and formalizing the processes until you can get something much more effective and repeatable. So an example would be Apple coming out with the next version of their iPhone that's a little bit better than the previous one. And efficiency innovation is when organizations have done all of that, and now they're just trying to extract as much capital and value out of those products and services, and so they're just trying to wring out as much cost as they possibly can. And there are innovations that occur in each of these stages, and they're all important. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. What do I want to talk about today? So there's lots that I could talk about. I could talk about regenerative medicine and artificial intelligence and blockchain and genomics and all kinds of things, but I'm not going to try to pontificate or predict the future. As you can see, it's notoriously difficult to predict the future. People a lot smarter than me have been completely wrong. I'd rather focus on what we can control and change. And what I'd like to do is introduce to all of you a new mental model. And my goal is to help you put on a new pair of lenses. Especially as people who work on the supply side of healthcare, we need to have a better understanding of the experience of people on the demand side of healthcare. So the title of my presentation today is What Healthcare Can Learn from Burger King, the Transformative Power of Demand-Side Innovation. Yes, Burger King. And I acknowledge the irony of holding aloft Burger King as an example at a school of public health, but watch me, here I go. Now, I don't know if the millennials in the room will remember this, but the double millennials might remember the jingle, have it your way, have it your way, have it your way at Burger King. Thank you, thank you. To me, this signifies exactly the shift that needs to happen in healthcare, where we no longer think of it as our way, but as the consumer's way. Let's set some context, and here's the situation. To quote Bob Wiley from the 1991 classic, What About Bob? The simplest way to put it, we have problems. And I know this audience is well aware of the challenges that we face, the opioid epidemic and lack of access to mental health services and obesity and maternal and infant mortality and all kinds of things, but healthcare is also really expensive, even more expensive than college tuition, if you can believe that. But here's a more personal example of why healthcare is broken. The man, I guess on my right, your left, is his name is Dennis Barksdale. And I met him in Greenville, South Carolina when I was a missionary. And he worked in construction, and about 6 years ago, he came home from work and just didn't feel well. He kind of had a headache, just felt sluggish and slow, and so he went upstairs to lay down, and he just kept getting worse and worse. But being this kind of tough guy in a construction role, he wanted to tough it out and didn't want to get care. Finally, it just got so bad that his wife took him to the ER, where they found out that he'd had a stroke. And strokes are very treatable if you can catch it early. But because he had waited so long, because he was afraid of the ER bill, he died in the hospital that night at 29 years old, leaving his widow and 3 now fatherless children. So what's the complication? The complication is that people are afraid to use our product. They don't even want it when they need it. The bottom line is people don't want what we're selling. And that's understandable. Health care is uncomfortable. I don't know why when you go into a hospital, you always lose your pants somehow. And you can't escape because they have your pants. And they're poking you with things and it smells funny. But I would also posit that I don't even think people really want health. Health is impossible to define. If I asked all of you to provide your own personal definition of health, you would all say something totally different. Poor health is what gets in the way of our desired progress. And what do people really want? They want more life, not more health. If someone had high blood pressure, but they could do anything that they wanted, they wouldn't care. If someone, so no one woke up on their 50th birthday saying, I've been waiting my whole life for this, I finally get to have my colonoscopy. That is, no one thinks that way. But what they do think about is, I can't wait for the peace of mind so I can get back to living my life when I find out that I don't have any issues. But we've built a system around treating illness and not providing more life. And in this way, we're a little bit more like a car body repair shop. Hospitals are human body repair shops. And I thought it would be interesting, what if we renamed our school the Milken Institute of Public Life instead of Public Health? That'd be interesting. But think about it. When you want to be more healthy, what do? You probably shop at Whole Foods. You buy a Peloton. You buy kombucha. You choose kale instead of French fries. You buy a pair of Nike running shoes. We don't think about accessing our local health system in order to to make that type of progress. And what things do we get rid of in our lives or fire? We fire our uncomfortable mattress, our chips or soda, we get rid of those, or we don't sit on the couch watching Stranger Things as much. But what we need to do as a healthcare system is change our value proposition so that people come to us when they have a job to be done of more life. And how can we help them on that journey? So what's the implication? We can't keep doing what we're doing and expect different results. And if health systems will be increasingly at risk financially for the health of populations, we need to help people live healthy lives. And that's something that we can do and Burger King can't. Otherwise, other companies who do have a more consumer-centric perspective and model will dislodge our position of trust in our communities. And in some places, that's already happening. And so we have to take the supply-side thinking blinders off and turn to the world of demand side, particularly through innovation. But let's get really clear first about what supply side and demand side means. Supply side is seeing the world through the eyes of your product and service. Supply side innovations are usually more on the sustaining or efficiency side, and it's tools like Lean, Six Sigma, Studer, Baldrige, all important. And supply side often focuses, it sees waste and inefficiency as the problem. Demand side, I would say, sees the world through the eyes of the consumer. Listen to what Jeff Bezos said. He says that the number one thing that has made us successful by far is obsessive compulsive focus on the customer. Demand-side innovations are more on the market creating, and they're more consumer-centric, and it's using tools like human-centered design, jobs to be done interviewing, value proposition canvas, voice of the customer research. And demand-side innovation understands that waste and inefficiency is a symptom of the problem, and that the problem is that our processes and our models are not consumer-centric. So one example in healthcare is if you think about like a hip replacement. It's great to be focused on things like avoiding surgical complications and that types of stuff. But what does the patient really want? They want to get back to playing tennis. That's what's important to them. That's their life. How can we help make that message clear that that's what we're helping provide for them? But here's an example from outside of healthcare. Two companies, Sears and Lowe's. Think about which one is on the supply side and which is on the demand side when I share their mottos, I guess. Sears has the best tools, and Lowe's is love where you live. Which one do you think is more focused on getting into the mind of the consumer? Now, it pays to play on the demand side. Sears isn't doing that well, and currently their market cap is only at 105 million, that's an M, whereas Lowe's is north of 86 billion. And so, but before you misunderstand, supply-side innovation and supply-side thinking has its place and is very important. And I'll get to that in a little bit. The problem is that we do it out of sequence. We need to be starting on the demand side and spending much more time and money figuring out what consumers really want. And then after we've determined those things, then we get really clear about making those processes really lean and efficient. I just don't believe that sustaining and efficiency innovations are going to produce the transformative change we want to see in our organizations. And it all starts with how we talk to people. Let's do a quick A/B test. Which would you say is more on the supply side, and which one would you say is more on the demand side? Where's the focus of the pictures? What's the message being communicated? So A is definitely supply side. You have the picture of the provider right in the middle. That's the focus. Whereas here, the consumer and their progress, not missing their weekend plans, that's the focus. Let's go to another one. This was a Facebook ad. Feeling better should be this easy. Where's the focus versus where's the progress that the patient or the consumer is trying to make? B from this slide and B from the previous slide had higher than 40% click-through rate than the other ones. So it's a real, it's not just semantics. It's not just changing words around. It's a real, it really drives results, and we have to make this shift together. We need new ways of working, demand-side ways of working, and in that spirit, for the remainder of our presentation, we're going to co-create it, you and me, okay? So this is going to be a little bit different, because I want this to serve as an example of the types of changes that we need to make at a macro level. So think about what is your desired progress. Maybe think about some of the things that I've shared already, and why you're here and what you hope to learn. And I would ask you, are you willing to hire me for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so as I share a few things? And so I'm prepared to talk about 4 different topics. I have all the slides ready to talk about 4. But as an audience, you'll have the opportunity to choose 2, maybe 3 if we have time, of those topics. And that's what we'll do, because what's important is that you feel like you're making your desired progress and that you are learning what you want to learn, not whether I feel like I've given a smooth presentation. Okay? So, here's some instructions. Take out your phones and pull up your internet browser and type in the URL that you see here, paulev.com/btingey518. And then once you've done that, hang tight while I provide some additional instructions. All right, here are, so paulev.com/btingey518 in your internet browser. And if you hadn't gotten it, there'll be some additional instructions in a couple of slides to get you caught back up. Okay, so before you read into it too much, here are the 4 topics. The first is, help me grow my creative confidence and learn a new innovation tool. The second, help me expand my thinking about emerging players in the healthcare industry. Number 3, help me understand how my organization can become more consumer-centric. Number 4 is, help me understand how health systems can transform their business models. I've written these actually in the jobs to be done parlance, and so that's a little bit of a teaser. So it is your time to vote. What you can do is tap on the question on your phone, and some arrows will appear on the left side, and then you can move it up and down, and it'll provide the ranking, and then you can submit your responses. We'll give that a minute. Ooh, a new number 1. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. Ooh. All right, so we have okay. I'll do at least 2. I don't know that we'll have time for more than that. And these are relatively brief. Okay. Ooh, oh. All right. All right, I'm going to pause it there. All right. You wanted to develop your creative confidence. Here we go. All right, so often in healthcare, we tend to fall in love with solutions first and then run around trying to find a problem to apply them to. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So how might we learn to fall in love with the problem first? There's a wonderful book that a professor at MIT wrote. His name's Hal Gregerson. He wrote a book called Questions Are the Answer, okay? And he shares this tool called a question burst, and we're going to do it together. But first, we need a problem. Our problem is that our zip code is a greater determinant of our health than our genetic code, and that's not equitable. Our access to clean water, exposure to pollution, who our peers are, the education system in our area, all those things have a greater contribution to our health actually than what's in our DNA. And so the truth is that health occurs in neighborhoods. So how might we design everyday life to be healthier? What we're going to do is, it's called a question burst activity. So with a partner, you can get out your phones, or if you have a pen and paper, what we're going to do is a question burst. So our question is, how might we design everyday life to be healthier? And there are 4 rules to this activity. The first is brainstorm questions only. We are not solutioning at this point. We are falling in love with the problem. Next is every single question that you write down must start with, how might we? And there's actually a lot of psychology behind that. The third is, as you share these ideas with your partner, you may not provide any type of preamble or explanation about your question. And you have 4 minutes to do it. Okay? So find a partner. I'm going to start a timer, and what you'll do is basically riff off this question. So how might we design everyday life to be healthier? How might we make it easier to find the fruit in the refrigerator? How might we make it easier and safer to bike in the city? How might we, so you're just trying to come up with as many questions as you can in 4 minutes, all right? So I'll set a timer, and you have 4 minutes. Go. What? I know. I'll do. Aim for quantity over quality. One more minute. Okay, pause. Pause. Well done. So my question is, how do you feel about the problem now? You feel more energized? Does anyone have a question that was particularly catalytic or insightful that they'd like to share? I served a 2-year mission knocking on people's doors. I am cured of any awkward silence. So please, come. How might we stop people from getting older? Interesting. That's catalytic. How might we affect change? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. Yes, one more. Excellent. So you see how these questions actually help lead you to some answers, but in a much better way, right? So fall in love with the problem before you jump to a solution. And a question burst activity can help you do that. So there's an innovation tool that you can take home and do it again. An advanced level of doing this is if you're doing something for the community, involve them in this activity. Okay, the next topic you wanted was business model innovation. And so I will get there. Teasing you with all this. So this is what you could have picked. Here we go. All right. I want to tell you the story of two companies. Actually, more like four companies. The first was a department store called Dayton's. Does anyone remember Dayton Hudson? Yeah? So they were founded in 1902 in Minnesota, and what they did in 1961 was they created a separate and autonomous business unit because they wanted to explore the idea of upscale discount retailing. And essentially they created a second company. It was entirely autonomous and free to do its own thing. And that was Target. And that's where it started. And over time, Target's revenues eventually eclipsed Dayton's. And then I think in 2000 or so, the company officially became Target, and then it divested all the Dayton stuff completely away. So you have a company that starts as one company, births a second company, and then that company grows up to overtake the first company. So the answer to the question about how might organizations transform their business model lies in the journey that Dayton Hudson and Target pursued. So the children of Israel, it took them 40 years wandering in the desert, and it took Dayton Hudson another 40 years to spin off Target. But Netflix followed the exact same pattern, and they did it much faster. So the Netflix of today bears little resemblance to the Netflix that first started in 1997. That was a DVD distribution company. In 2000, famously, Blockbuster declines purchasing it. And in the 2000s, Netflix started developing this recommendation engine, and that actually served to be a huge asset to them later on. But in 2008, Reed Hastings saw what the internet was doing, and mobile phones and streaming, and he saw ahead, and he basically created a separate company. And they were no longer in the DVD, well, not at that point, but he said, we're still going to do this DVD distribution thing, but we're going to build a second company over here where we're going to have online streaming services. And we're going to have different people leading it. It's going to have different metrics of success and different processes and everything, different resources. And that's going to grow and flourish over here. And they split the fees so that if you were subscribing to the streaming version versus the DVD, it was like a separate experience. In 2013, they began adding original content, including in 2016, one of my favorite TV shows, Stranger Things. That's an important part of the timeline here. I needed to release that. And the Netflix that we know today is that it's an online streaming company and even a media production company. It's no longer the DVD company that it was before. So business model innovation. Every single business model is destined to follow the same trajectory. And it travels a one-way journey. And it begins with the creation of a new business unit. Disruptive, market creating, whatever you want to call it, but the idea is that it gets created as this separate unit and is allowed the flexibility to kind of grow on its own. From there, as things become more clear about the value proposition, the business model starts to harden and processes begin to congeal, and you turn into the sustaining phase, where what you're focusing on is top-line growth and working on developing the people and the processes that are going to help you scale your business. Eventually, a business model enters the efficiency phase, which is where most of healthcare is right now. And in the efficiency phase is you have basically come to a point where you can no longer extract a higher price point from your consumers, and so what you have to do is just wring out all the costs that you possibly can. Each set of processes has a different focus. It has a different way that it interacts with other parts of the business, and it has different measures of success. And so you start from, if you look at the very bottom, in the creation phase, it's all about understanding the consumer's job to be done. What progress do they want in their life? And if there's a product market fit. And then you move into more of the income statement. You're looking at top-line revenue. You're looking at how your P&L is working together. And then eventually, the primacy of capital allocation takes over, and you are trying to free up cash flow in any way that you possibly can. And so you're focused on balance sheet and financial ratios. Every business model follows this process, and it does not go backwards. And my point is that if we want to change our business model, you can't turn the clock back and work backwards. You have to create an entirely new business model. You need an emergent strategy. So what do? We follow the Netflix and Dayton Hudson game plan. And it essentially comes down to this, and it's from a great book called Dual Transformation, and this is something that we have been trying to do at Atrium Health. It's a simple equation, A plus B plus C. A is repositioning your core business to make it as profitable as possible. B is you spin off tomorrow's growth engine. You give it the latitude to do what it needs to do to become a new company. And then C is the capabilities that A possesses that helps you do B, okay? And so A, its goal is you maximize its resilience so that it has as much cash to fund what you're doing in B. And so you optimize today in order to create tomorrow, and you use your unique assets. But here's the trick. You only use the assets that you actually need from the core business, and you allow the new business to choose new types of resources if it wants it. You don't have to hold them to the same IT standards or the same IT equipment or any of, I don't know why I'm railing on IT necessarily, but you allow it the flexibility to choose and pull in new resources that A, maybe wasn't even using before. And so I really believe this is the only way that incumbent organizations are able to disrupt themselves, is to acknowledge that you can't turn the clock back and work backwards. You have to actually spin out something entirely new. Use your core business and all of its unique assets to do that, and then create your growth engine of tomorrow. Successful leaders are able to arbitrate between A and B, and the types of leaders that you need to do A versus the types of leaders that you need to do B are entirely different. And it often gets messed up. The organizational ambidexterity can be really difficult for managers to manage, because you have to think in almost two different ways at the same time: the core business versus the new business, fee for service versus whatever our future is as a healthcare industry. So I'll leave this module with this quote. Over the long term, the greatest innovation risk a company can take is to decide not to create new businesses that decouple the company's future from that of its current business units. And I think I'm out of time, so I'll only do 2 modules, which is fine. Therefore, what? Let's conclude. The knowledge that people don't want what we're selling, I think, should empower us, and it shouldn't depress us, because we know what we need to do now. And I think we're just barely scratching the surface. I'm just barely scratching the surface on any of this, but I feel more optimistic than ever. We have the power to change it by moving from supply side thinking into demand side, and obsess over our customers and get into their lives and learn about their experiences. And I know what I said, that I'd rather that we fall in love with a problem, not a solution, but I'll give you just one takeaway. So Todd Dunn was someone that we interviewed on our podcast, and he talked about what he calls the 3 C's of design disease. It's kind of a mouthful. And the idea is that if you find yourself planning some type of solution for a patient, and you find yourself in a conference room, on a conference call, or in your cubicle, get out of there and go and talk to the patient and design it with them. Talk to them. I tell you, I was in a design session at Stanford a couple months ago, and we were working on social media advocacy for COPD patients. And sitting next to me was someone with COPD who had their oxygen tank, and every 2 or 3 seconds there was this puff of oxygen into their nostrils that kept them alive, essentially. It's entirely different to design a social media campaign when someone with the disease is sitting right next to you. And so whatever you're working on, involve the patient, involve them as consumers, design with them, not just for them. That is demand-side innovation. So in conclusion, I hope that you feel empowered with creative confidence through a new mindset, a new way of looking at healthcare, demand-side way of looking at healthcare, that you have a new tool in your toolbox. You have a question burst that you can pull out of your pocket when you need it, and that you go back wherever you are and obsess over your customers. And to help our industry pull our head out of the sands of being on the supply side so much and moving more towards the demand side. Thank you. All right. Before we close, there's actually an important part of demand-side innovation, and that's being willing and even eager to get some feedback. And if you would open up your phones, because again, it's not important that I feel like I gave a slick presentation. It's whether you feel like you made the progress you were seeking. And so get your phones back out and go back to that same URL, polev.com/btingey518. And again, you achieving your desired progress is what really matters. And I hope that I helped you do that today. So if you could give me, excuse me, I slipped into supply side thinking. Please rate your experience. All right, it's not about me, it's about you. Just take a minute. Yeah, there should be some results that come up, but results. Maybe the internet's slow. 3. All right. Yep. Well, what you can do is, if you really want to give me some feedback, you can reach out to me. Please connect. If there was something that you really wished I had talked about, I'd love to have a conversation. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter. This is my email. I'm happy to share some of the things that we've learned and things that I'm still learning, honestly. But it's been an honor. Thank you so much.
Then, on behalf of the faculty and the MHA Alumni Association, we want to present you this plaque as our 17th annual Young Alumni
Thank you.
presenter. Thank you very much. And the all-important gift bag with specific items for your son. So
Perfect.
Yeah, all right.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank
this
you
was
for
great.
saying
And you can ask him a lot of questions at cocktails. There you are.
Yep.
She wants to get a picture of this. All right. Drinks are on me. Have at it.
All right. Thanks, Professor Anderson. All right, turn it off.
Really good. Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks.
Just gonna say,